everyone. My name's Mitch. By way of introduction, I'm a principal engineer at Microsoft. I actually work on the .NET Aspire team. I actually work on, it's called the .NET Cloud team. So we're responsible for a few things. So ASP.NET Core and Orleans, .NET Orleans, if you've heard of that, as well as .NET Aspire, which I'm going to be talking about tonight. We're a pretty small little team doing lots of interesting stuff at the moment. And I think before I get too far into it, I'm kind of curious, who's heard of .NET Aspire? Okay, keep your hand up if you're actually using it day to day. That's awesome. Okay, a couple of people. All right, so this session I'm going to try and it's hard with .NET Aspire to decide what to show people because the team's moving so fast, building so many features. So I'm going to try and show the most important things so you could use it, but I'll also be showing some of the new features that are actually shipping this month or coming out this month. There are some things that I cannot show you because they're still top secret. So all I would say is make sure you watch build. There's some stuff that we're announcing there, but I won't go into any more detail about what it is. If I said what they were, I would have people, a hit squad out after me. So, okay, so let's try and define what Aspire is. This is something that we've struggled with in the 2 years that we've been working on this product. We used to have this big long thing where we said that .NET is this thing for building cloud native applications, blah, blah, blah. But what we found was that that kind of put people off. You know, the reality is that people don't really know what a cloud native application is. Really, what we're about is helping developers be more productive, building production ready applications. So we've got a set of tools and templates and extensions which allow you to do that. And really what we're trying to do is remove as many obstacles as possible to get your app into production. And so I'm going to do a bunch of demos mostly today. I'm not a huge slide producer, and feel free to stop and ask questions as we go. If I can't answer it, then I'll make up an answer. And I'll submit a PR to make it true by the time I get home. Hopefully my team doesn't see this video. All right, so let's jump in. I've got Visual Studio open here, and I've got a .NET web project open in the solution. I'll zoom in just so you can see what that is. And for the keen-eyed amongst you, you'll see that that's a Blazor project. That's kind of irrelevant. It's just the template I happen to choose. It could be a web API or any other sort of .NET project. And what we're going to do is take this kind of vanilla .NET project and enable it for Aspire. And we're just going to sort of pick apart what the process is. And then I'm going to jump across and go into some more detail. But I wanted to start in Visual Studio because I'd imagine a lot of you are using Visual Studio. And I wanted to just point out that even if I spend a lot of time in VS Code today, this all works in Visual Studio as well. So I've got my project here. What I'm going to do is right mouse click on this and I'm going to say add .NET orchestrator support. So you can see there I've got that little menu item there. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to answer a question here, what version of Aspire I want to use, what my project prefix is, and I'm going to click OK. And some stuff's happened over on the side there. It's still downloading some packages and so on. But you'll see over in the corner here that we've got this new project here called Hello Aspire AppHost. And we've got our original project, and we've also got this project called Service Defaults. So let's have a look at what they actually are. So I've added it, and I'm just going to run it. And after a few moments, just make sure I'm actually on the Wi-Fi on the network here. There I am. That's great. I need to point out that I literally downloaded the new bits, so I don't have my package cache warmed up, unfortunately.
I see a pre-release version in there.
Yeah, I live in pre-release versions, so ironically, that's actually the lowest risk path for me. Okay, so this console window that's popped up is actually what's called the .NET Aspire AppHost, right? It's just a .NET project, and it launched a few things. It launched my front-end project, which you can see there in that list of resources. But this whole thing that you're looking at here is actually called the Aspire dashboard. And really that's the visual piece of .NET Aspire that you interact with. And so you can see here that it's actually got a link to the URLs. If I click on that, then I'm taken to my application, okay? And if I want to look at the console output for my application, I can click on the little console icon there, and that's the output from my app. Now, that's all well and good, but what else is going on here? Well, as I'm interacting with this application, when I enlisted the project as in the Aspire orchestration, we added a few things. First of all, we added that service defaults project to my web project. So if I go back into Visual Studio here and look at Solution Explorer, you can see that the front-end project now has a reference to the service defaults project, just there. And this service default project is actually pretty important. What it does is it contains a whole bunch of code. Now this is not like a library, this is actually code we inject into your project, and the intention is for you to be able to customize it. But we put a bunch of stuff in there by default for doing things like configuring OpenTelemetry, adding health checks, enabling this thing called service discovery, which we'll look at shortly. But what it means is because we've done things like enable OpenTelemetry, as I interact with this application, so for example, I use the various pages, and I go to the structured logs here, we're now getting structured logging information, but I'm also getting tracing information. So this is OpenTelemetry that's being streamed back to the dashboard from my app. And we haven't really had to do a whole heap of work to get this. And so when we talk about Aspire helping you build production-ready applications, part of it is doing some of this stuff for you. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to drop out of Visual Studio and go into my home territory, which is actually VS Code. Our team in Redmond, we kind of spread who uses what tools just to make sure we're getting a lot of manual test coverage. And I am one of the people on the team that likes to use VS Code, but I actually also like to use VS Code inside Codespaces and use dev containers. So I've got a Codespace set up here. And we're going to use the latest builds of .NET Aspire, and we'll just create a project from scratch. And it's going to be a little bit more involved, and we'll see how it all ties together. So hopefully everyone can see that. Can everyone see that command prompt? It's okay. All right, so I've got the, this is a new feature that was actually released as preview in 9.2 called the Aspire CLI. The Aspire CLI is like a front end to the .NET CLI that actually helps you get started with .NET Aspire. And the idea is it's supposed to be a way that we can allow people who may not be like .NET native to start using Aspire if they want to. So I'm going to use the Aspire command here, and I'm going to create a new project. And I'm just going to add a switch here. When you're using Aspire, you won't need to do that. I need to do that because these packages don't exist anywhere else. And I'm going to create a starter project. And I'm going to call it Hello Aspire. and drop it into the source directory. And you can see there I'm using a preview release. This is going to be shipping real soon now. It'll definitely be out by build. If you're wondering, I'm using GitHub Codespaces here, which is like a hosted VS Code environment. And so I have a dev container configuration file here. And the repo that I open this Codespace on, you can actually use that as a template for your own repos if you want. So even if you don't want to use Codespaces, but you want to use dev containers, you just copy this dev container file. It'll have all of the base dependencies that you need for Aspire. Okay, so I've created my new project, and you can see here that we've got the familiar AppHost and service defaults, but this project's a little bit more involved. We've got a front-end component, the web application, and we've got a back-end, which is the API. And this is going to be something that will allow us to demonstrate some of the other capabilities that we've got within Aspire, just around distributed applications. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this. You can use F5 in Visual Studio here, just like you can in Visual Studio Code, just like you can in Visual Studio. I've got the C# dev kit installed here, but I'm just going to use the CLI in this case. I'm going to use the Aspire run command. And you'll notice it did a few things there. It actually automatically set up the certificates for you. It's building the AppHost, starting it, spinning up the dashboard, and eventually, ta-da, we've got my services running in the project. Okay, and it's got convenient links here. Now, because I'm running in a code space, we have this big ugly URL here. That's because I'm running in a container somewhere in the US, and I want to access the dashboard that's being hosted in that container, but I don't have local port forwarding, so I'm using port forwarding through the internet. But if I was doing this locally on a dev container, it would just be like a local host address. And so there is the Aspire dashboard. All right, just like it was previously, but this time we've got two components running. And if I click on the front end and hit the weather endpoint, it's going to make a call to the API service to get the weather information. And this is kind of where we start looking at some of the nice features of .NET Aspire and service discovery. Before I do that, I'm just going to look back at those traces, and you can see here that because Aspire has automatically injected OpenTelemetry configuration into each of those processes, I'm now getting a view of the traffic as it moves between the front end and the API. So if I click on this trace, I can see where the relative time is spent in my operations, right? One of the things we're trying to do with Aspire is make it so that you instrument your applications as you're developing locally, but you don't have to wait until you get to production before you can actually see that information and understand whether that diagnostic information is actually helpful or not, right? Which is one of the problems that often happens when you're setting up telemetry. The other thing I want to talk about is really how that front-end application knew how to communicate with that back-end API service. If you think about how you would do this manually, you'd probably have some config file where you were like typing in localhost and some random port, and on your local machine you would have to manage that. Well, if we look at the AppHost here, we can see my apphost.cs file, and you can see that I'm referencing the API service and the Hello World front-end project. But notice here I'm capturing a variable. When I call the builder, I go builder.addProject. And this is like a reference to that code, and now I can pass that around like a standard .NET object. And so I'm actually saying, hey, I want the front-end project to know what the address is for the back end. Okay, so I'm going dot with reference. What that does is automatically inject some configuration into the web front end as it's running. So if I look at the dashboard here and go to the resources and scroll down, you can see that we've got all these environment variables that we've set up for you. But right down the bottom here, we've got services __ API service blah, right? And what this is the underlying address for that API service. One of the things that we did inside the web front-end project for you in this template is call the add service defaults method. And if I go into that definition there and see how that works, you can see that we're setting up a HTTP client with service discovery. And that service discovery library is something that we've shipped, well, we've added to .NET that allows it to dereference from that API service name to the actual underlying physical address using those injected variables. So there's no magic here, right? We've got really just a mechanism for specifying environment variables. So if you wanted to take this code and like manually deploy it into a production environment, you could do that no problem. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper. We're going to go into the web front end, and we're going to look at the way that that's wired up. So you can see here that we add service defaults, that's fine, and we're adding a HTTP client. So this is like a standard .NET library, but inside you can see here that instead of putting in the local host address and the port, we have this HTTPS plus HTTP API service. And what this is doing is we're saying we prefer to connect over HTTPS if it's available, obviously, and we want to dereference that API service name back to the underlying local host address. So remember those environment variables that I saw? So this means in your code, you don't need to change your code when you deploy it, provided you set those environment variables. We'll manage the transition for you. Okay. So let's go a little bit further with this. Let's start adding some dependencies. And this is really where I think Aspire starts to shine. So what I want to do is this application, calling the weather service is really expensive, and so I'm going to add some caching, okay? And I want to use Redis. All right. So most people who would want to use something like Redis, you would need to download the container, or depending on what platform they're the executable, spin it up, and then copy connection string information around. And it's something that you would have to do manually when you set up your dev environment. One of the things we want to do with Aspire is make it so you can clone down your repo, hit F5, and it just works. All right. We want to really reduce the friction to working with your code bases. So what we've done is in the command line, now you can do this via just adding NuGet packages as well. This is just a shortcut way of doing it. I want to say I want to add a package, pre-release again. What we're doing is we're actually downloading from NuGet, and our private package fees in this case, a list of packages that we know are good for Aspire. And so we've got a whole bunch of integrations that we've built out of the box for various things, including Azure specific integrations. AWS has got some stuff, but you can take a look through here, and for most applications we've got your needs covered. You can actually build your own customizations if you want. I want to use Redis, and that will do, I guess, that version. And so what this is doing is it's adding a hosting integration to my AppHost. And so if I go back to my AppHost now, this is my AppHost code. This, what the AppHost is really all about is defining a model of your application. So this is probably really the most important thing about Aspire. You describe your application using this high-level AppHost, using just plain old C#. We've got these APIs that plug in, and then when you run it, we interpret that model and decide how to start it up. When you deploy it, we interpret that model and decide how to deploy it based on some inputs from you. So in this case, we're saying that I want to have a Redis cache. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to say, hey, builder, add Redis. I want a cache, and then I want to use it for caching the actual HTML result coming back from the server. So I go down here to my web application, and I go with reference cache. So now I've told my front end about the cache. I might also want to say, hey, don't start the front end until the cache is online. That's fine. That's nice for local development. In reality, in production, outages can occur, and so your code needs to be resilient to that as anyway. And that's where some of the client library integrations that we've done come into play. But for convenience, it's often nice to just say, hey, don't start this until its dependencies are online. The next thing I need to do is I need to add a client library that knows how to talk to Redis to my front end. And there is actually a pre-existing client library called stackexchange.redis, which is fantastic. The Aspire team hasn't gone and rewritten those libraries, right? We're not out there to replace libraries. What we've done is we've created some packages which augment those libraries to make sure that they plug in and do things like telemetry and retry logic really well. So chances are you're already using these libraries if you're using Redis. So it's just easy to adopt the Aspire package, which include that dependency, but add in the extra spice to make it work nicely. So I'm just going to go add NuGet. I'm going to add it to the web project. There we go. And I want to use output caching, so we've got a library that's sort of pre-set up for output caching. And that looks fine, I guess. It's the downside of using preview builds. I get a new build every couple of hours, so I don't know. Okay, so I've got my client library. Yeah, that's right. If something goes wrong, I'll probably just have to cut and paste a few version numbers around. You won't have to do that because you're not using the pre-release feeds. And then I'm in my web project program CS file here, and I want to teach my project how to use output caching. Okay. Now in the AppHost, you can see that I gave this Redis cache a name, right? But I don't know what to do here, so I can go builder.add Redis output cache. Oops. There we go. And say cache. And this is going to do all the work necessary to take the configuration that we've injected into that web project and set up the dependency injection services in .NET, as well as all the OTel telemetry stuff and configuration and so on. And what I will do before I start this application up is I'm going to increase the cache timeout. It's 5 seconds. I can't do anything on this laptop in 5 seconds. So I'm going to bring up the console again and go Aspire run. Hopefully I've got no typos and I get no compiler errors. There we go, it's a good sign.
So that Aspire CLI, is that a separate package you've had to install the tool, or is that part of the .NET SDK?
It's a tool that you install. We are looking at different ways that we can deliver it. So it's in preview right now. Yeah, good question. So it's in preview right now. It's not GAing this month. I'm kind of hoping next month, but I don't want to promise. You know, the Aspire team kind of ships things or makes things GA when they're ready. So, but we've got lots of stuff going into GA every single month, but we just sort of pick what goes when. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch my dashboard again. And you can see now that the Redis cache is there running, right? And so I can actually see the console logs from that. This is actually a container. So Aspire's actually downloaded the container image, spun it up, configured it, and it's actually injected environment variables into the front end here. So if I scroll down, you'll see that there's a connection string for the cache resource, and it's got the address as well as the generated password. So we've done that all for you, okay? And so now if I go to the front end and generate some traffic, and then go back to the traces, you'll see that there should be some traffic there which is hitting the cache. So you can see there that I'm hitting the weather endpoint, but instead of actually going to the API service, it's doing output caching and it's hitting the Redis cache instead, which in theory would be more performant depending on your architecture. That's not all. So it's one thing to just like make the libraries talk to one another, but one of the things that we really wanted to do with Aspire, and something that we only realized we could do once we got into like the getting close to our release, we realized that now that we had all this information in the model, we can start to light up tools that allow developers to be more productive. And so if I go back here and I shut this thing down, I can go to my Redis cache and I say, well, actually, I want to be able to look at what's in the cache. And so I can just plumb in a tool with Redis Insight. Oops. Okay. So now if I run this again, you'll notice if I bring up the dashboard here, oops, I'll actually refresh that this time, that not only have we got the cache running, we've got this Insight instance running, which is actually downloaded in container right now. It's now running, and it's been told how to talk to that Redis instance. Now we've got this for like different services, so we've got things like Postgres and Cosmos and all that kind of stuff plugged into this, and so you can go add Cosmos DB, run as the emulator, enable the data explorer, create the database collections, all that kind of stuff for you in like a couple of lines of code. But if I go in here and I interact with the application and generate some data and go back to my dashboard and go into Redis Insights. Now we don't build Redis Insights, right? This is an open source tool that we've just integrated via our libraries. And I go into the cache, and there you see the reason why I set it for 50 seconds, so I could actually show you this. That's the actual cached output page in the Redis cache. Okay. So that's pretty cool. But Aspire is also extensible. So who's ever had an application where they've got some sort of database instance and they wish they could just like truncate the database or flush the database or whatever it is? It's like something you're doing in development where you want to try something, then reset it to a baseline. Okay. Well, we realized, hey, we've got this dashboard. What if we could teach the dashboard to make a request back into Aspire, the Aspire AppHost, and then make calls into the apps to do things. So from the dashboard, you can do certain actions and make it kind of extensible. So what we can do is in the AppHost, I can say, hey, for the web project, let's get rid of that. I want to have this command I can use in the dashboard to reset the database. Okay, or reset the Redis cache. And so I'm going to say with command. Now, you can use two things. You've got with command or with HTTP command here. With command basically allows you to provide a callback that runs inside the AppHost to do whatever you want, right? It's just code. I'm going to use with HTTP command because I want, when I click the button in the dashboard, I want a request to go back to the AppHost and then through to my web front end. Okay? So we've done some heavy lifting for you. So I'm going to give it a name. I'll say what's the path I want to hit. I'm just going to have a flush DB endpoint. And I'm just going to call it flush DB. That's it. That's my modification to the AppHost. And now I go over into my web front end. And I say, okay, let's create an endpoint here. I'm going to say app map post because we use post by default. This is minimal API if you haven't used it before. And I'm just going to say I want a connection multiplexer. If you use Redis cache, you'll know what this is. If you don't, then you probably won't need to write this command. But that is like a central, that represents the connection to the Redis database. All right. And all I'm going to do here is, when I call FlushDB or post to this FlushDB endpoint from the AppHost, I'm going to execute the FlushDB command in Redis. And I'm going to go cache.getDatabase, execute. Oh, thanks. Completions. It's nice when it helps you. Okay, so I'm done. All right. So now I'm going to run my AppHost again. Now remember, I set a timeout of 50 seconds for that cache entry. So I'm going to do a few things here. I'm going to try and get it all done within a minute to make sure it works. And if it doesn't work, well, I'll be able to debug it. Okay, so I'll bring up my dashboard. The first thing I want to test is that the FlushDB command is actually showing up on the dashboard. So if I go to the front end, which is where I added it, you can see that, actually that's not helping, is it? Where is it? Is it? Hang on, sorry, I'm going to have to zoom out. That's a bug. No, it's not there.
Yeah, second from the bottom.
Ah, I'm blind. Okay, so I pressed that. Okay, so that command actually executed. So it actually sent the web request and said FlushDB. Don't believe me, it's working. I'm going to go into the dashboard, I'm going to populate the cache, and then I'm going to use it to wipe the cache. So there we go, we've got something in the cache. I'm going to go to Redis Insight. Okay, there's my entry. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to say flush. Come back here. I'm going to refresh. It's gone. All right. So the idea is that with Aspire, we're kind of creating this like pane of developer glass for your distributed applications, which allows you to plug in things which are useful to you from a software development point of view. Not only can you quickly add dependencies and then reference them in your application, but you can also plug in third-party tools like Redis Insight here. We've got PG Admin and there's a bunch of other ones as well. But you can also plug in and actually execute commands inside your applications and processes to do what you want to do. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is talk about deployment. And we probably don't have time for me to fully deploy an application to Azure, but I'm just going to show you how it works. And maybe by the time I finish talking, it'll be live and we can actually prove that it works. So when we first released Aspire 8.0 last year sometime, we worked with the Azure SDK team at Microsoft to build an extension to AZD, which is the Azure Developer CLI, which knows how to talk to Aspire to pull out that app model and deploy the application. Okay, so we've got some plumbing built into Aspire to support that. Because this is the first time I've used AZD on this container, you get to see me log in. Hello Windows, hello, it's me. Okay, that worked. Okay, so now I've got AZD set up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of show or tell AZD about this AppHost. So I use the AZD init command. And what it does is it looks through the source tree looking for AppHosts, basically. And it's found one. I'll say, yeah, that looks good. And now I'm going to say, now deploy it. Now you can put this in your CI/CD pipeline. There's actually AZD, if you look it up, there's commands for like configuring GitHub actions and ADO pipelines. Go to town with that sort of stuff. I'm just going to run it locally here for simplicity. Okay. looks fine. Hope they've got capacity there. Should do. It's not a big application. Okay, so what it's doing now is AZD is actually running the AppHost, but it's running in a mode called publish mode. And when it's in publish mode, what it does is it spits out this JSON file called manifest. And that JSON file is like a list of all of the containers and all of the environment variables with a whole bunch of placeholders that AZD interprets and then deploys. This was our original deployment tool for Aspire. And for deploying to Azure right now, it's probably the best one. Right? The community actually came out with another tool called Aspire, which does Docker Compose and Kubernetes. And we've actually worked with the author of those tools, and we've actually built that functionality now into Aspire. Okay, so we've worked with the community to do that. So I'm going to let that run in the background. I'm going to bring up another terminal window, and I'm going to look at getting this up and running in Docker Compose. All right, so remember what we've got here is we've got 2 web applications and a Redis cache that they talk to. And this experience is actually built into the Aspire CLI. So I just go to the Aspire CLI and I'm going to tell it that I want to support generating Docker Compose artifacts. So I'm going to say add Docker. Aspire itself relies on Docker or Podman to run containers. But in this case, what I'm actually doing is saying I want to deploy to Docker Compose. We've got a similar extension for Kubernetes as well. I'm fine. I'm almost done. Okay, so if I go Aspire publish, I've got to actually add. I'm going to now teach the AppHost about Docker Compose, and that's pretty simple. I can go builder.add Docker Compose environment. Just give it a name, doesn't matter too much what it is. And then down here I say Aspire publish. And what it's going to do is it's going to run that AppHost in publish mode again, like AZD did. But this time it's going to generate Docker Compose artifacts and spit them out to the disk. And you'll notice here it's actually going and building the container images for my app. So if I had like a Docker file for like a completely custom piece of software that I wanted to deploy, it would actually go and build the Docker file as well for you. So this is not just for .NET. So if you had like an application with Next.js or Vite and you had like a Docker file that built it all, you could plug it in here. So now that I've got that, you'll see in my source tree, it spat out a couple of files. One is the Docker Compose file. You can see here that it's got my cache with the image that I'm using. You can override that, by the way, as well as configuration for setting up the password, as well as information for my front end. And you'll notice all of the OTel configuration variables and all that kind of stuff is all set up. So now what I'm going to do is just go Docker Compose up. Oh, actually I forgot to do something. Docker Compose. Because Aspire doesn't generate passwords for you. So when we deploy with AZD, if we need a password, AZD will generate the password and it will put it in a key vault for you automatically. But because we're using Docker Compose, there is no safe place that we can put a password. All right. So what we do is we create an environment file, and you could create an environment variable. In this case, I'm just going to put a password in. There we go. And then I go Docker Compose up. And if I go to my Docker tab here in VS Code, you'll see that I now have those 3 containers running inside Docker Compose. And not only that, if I right mouse click on it and open it in the browser, it works. All right. So it's probably the easiest deployment process you've ever seen. All right. The thing that powers that, the thing that is probably the key takeaway from this session is the information that you put into the app model is teaching Aspire a lot of information about your application architecture and it can use that information when it's building, both running locally, but also building deployment artifacts. Okay. So if I go back to my other terminal window here where I had AZD running, you'll notice that it's a fair way into deploying my service now. It's gone and created, it's created a resource group, it's created an ACR registry, it's set up log analytics, it's deployed the API service, it's deploying the Redis container now. You can actually tell Aspire and AZD that instead of running your own Redis container, you want to use like an Azure Redis container. And so if you want like a more production strength Redis container, you can do that. That takes a little while to deploy, so I tend not to demo doing that. they take about 15 minutes to deploy. Well, they scale very well.
Do you configure that in the host file or somewhere outside?
Configure what in the host file?
Like if you want to basically choose the resources that you want to deploy, maybe an existing container registry, or maybe rather than a container app,
yep.
You want to deploy that to AKS or app service. How do you do that?
Yeah, so for AKS, we've got like a Kubernetes package which you can install. It's not as mature as, it's still in preview, and the Docker one's still in preview, but we have a Kubernetes package and it will generate a Kubernetes chart for you. Deploying to app service, that's in preview as well. Like literally in the last week that code merged in. Mileage may vary on that one. But yeah, you can just say basically add Azure App Service environment and it will actually take care of doing that deployment for you. And the deployment mechanism will actually take care of doing all the host names and all that kind of stuff. So that's deployed. A few things I want to point out here. Not only do I have all my services, if I hit the front end, so this is literally the application now running in Azure for reals. It's production, and it's now talking to the back end. So I haven't manually configured a port or anything like that. You'll also notice that the web API itself is inaccessible. So I've got both the cache and the API now have been deployed internally. So you explicitly tell it that you want this service to be available externally inside the AppHost. So you can see here we have with external endpoints. So if you've just got an application where you just want the external stuff, that web front end to be exposed externally, that's how you do that. And then we also have worked with the Azure Container Apps team to deploy a version of the Aspire dashboard into ACA. So even though the Aspire dashboard is not really like a production telemetry system, we got lots of feedback that it was actually quite useful for figuring out what's going on inside your application. And so the ACA team actually hosts an Aspire dashboard for your application and forwards the telemetry to it. So you can jump here and look at traces and so on. So you get that kind of same experience between local development and production. This is not a replacement for like log analytics or something like that. There's no real fancy query interface here. But as a developer, being able to just quickly check something is actually quite useful.
How much storage do they give those containers for the logs?
To be honest, I don't know. It's a good question. The dashboard itself doesn't actually store anything. Even in local development, we don't do that. Something we're thinking about.
So it's all just in memory?
Yeah. And it's like a circular buffer, basically.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. I think that's really, what I wanted to cover tonight in terms of like the structured content. In terms of resources, there's 3 URLs which I think are worth remembering. The first one will take you to the main docs page for Aspire. The second one is our actual repo. So if you use Aspire and you experience problems, you have bugs, report issues, we're very active there. That's pretty much where all of our work comes from. So, and then we've also got a link to a brand new Aspire Discord channel if you want to join that. It's really new, like within the last 24 hours. We were sort of working with the .NET one, but we've got our own now. Okay. Questions?
With the resource deployments, obviously that's deploying into things like container apps and the like. Is there anywhere in there that you can hint, like in the AppHost, that you can hint at what sort of resource limits you want? If you have something that needs a lot of beef and one that doesn't?
Yeah, so good question. That is kind of what we call compute environment dependent. And so when you have an application, you can use, I'll add another package here. We've got a set of extensions that you can use to override some of those defaults. So you can say, hey, I want to scale this resource to 0, for example. And so if I go Aspire, add, pre-release, I'll get there eventually. Just like we've got like a package for Docker and Kubernetes, we've actually got a package for container apps.
And I assume that'll be true for all the other deployment targets that support as you add them?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is avoid kind of polluting our core API surface with things which are like compute environment specific. So we think of compute environments as a resource, just like any other resource, and you can then extend it and mutate it. But sometimes, like the API service, for example, runs inside the compute environment, so you need to apply some metadata to the API service to get it to tune the way you want. And so this is where our work with the Azure SDK team came in. We've got like a publish as Azure Container App, and there's a I won't try and ad-lib this, but there's like an infra API here, which actually gives you access to the underlying bicep that we generate, and you can actually splice in whatever values you want. Okay. So the Azure SDK team worked with us to build this azure.provisioning.star set of libraries, and we expose them through this so you can actually customize a bunch of different resources in the app model.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I think you already mentioned about the injecting another Docker compose when we are building it. But for example, if I'm building a React.js application as part of the same project, is that the model that we should use? Like that's the command we should use?
Yeah. So let's ad-lib this. Let's go. This is where my demos go off the rails, right? Because I'm winging it. Let's go. I think it's npm create next app, isn't it? Latest. Create. Is that it? Oh, NPX, right. That's right. Spot the .NET dev in the room. Okay, so we're going to call this front end. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so I've got my Next.js application here, my source tree, front end there. So I go into the AppHost, and what I need to do is I need to add an extension to the AppHost for dealing with Node.js. So if I go aspire.add Node.js pre-release, and whilst that's running, I'll come back to the AppHost here, and I'll go builder add npm. Does that finish? Gotta wait for the. Oh, what happened there? Oh, I do select the right version. Okay, there we go. So here I'm just going to go and add an npm app, call it front end, and we give it a path which is relative to the AppHost root. Okay, so in this case we go up a directory and call it front end, and here we're just going to go and run the start. I think is it start? might be dev. Dev. Okay, so go to the AppHost and say run dev. And what we're going to do there is we'll just run that for now and see where we end up. Okay, so now we've got our little front end there. Notice it's running as an executable, but we've got no endpoints. So we have to tell Aspire how to expose access to that Next.js application. So I'm going to answer your question. I'm sort of getting up to it. I'll sort of show you the way to get there, and then we plug in. So then we go to the AppHost and we tell it that we want to set the port variable. So we want to have a with HTTP endpoint, and we don't really care what it is, what the port is, but we want it to set the value for that port into the port variable. Okay. Okay, and so now we've got that front end endpoint, and if I click on that, we'll get our, hopefully we'll get our Next.js like default landing page kind of thing. There we go, it's working. And then now let's get this publishable. So now we've got this Next.js application and we want to build it into like a Docker container so it can be deployed somewhere. So what I'm going to do is, because I won't pretend to be a Next.js expert, I'm going to get AI to do this for me. And I'm going to say, I can probably single shot this. So I'll go create a Docker file. And in here, I'm going to say, create a Docker file, which create a multi-stage Docker file, which builds a Next.js app and then copies the artifacts into a runtime container that can run on a container host. And let's see what it generates. Some more real estate would be good. But okay, what are we doing? We're creating an app directory, copying the package JSON over, installing the dependencies, copying the other things over, doing the build. Then we've got our runtime container, which is the last container. We copy over the files, so the public files, and Next.js files, and node modules, and expose it on port 3000. That looks okay. So then, good job, Copilot. You get paid today. And because I now have this Docker file, I can say publish as Docker file. And if you've got a Docker file, that implies you've got a container. So now I'll tell it how to expose, because remember it said expose on port 3000. I don't know if that's the right port or not, but we'll find out. I can now say, well, that's going to generate a container. And on that container, I want to expose a HTTP endpoint on port 3000. Target port 3000. There we go. And now if I go back to my terminal and go Aspire publish, if I've done it right, fingers crossed, it should build not only my other containers, it's blown up, which is, what have I done wrong here? Okay. don't do that because I've already got it. It's inheriting the port from the outer. Okay, building a front end. We got another front end to build in a second. Hopefully Copilot did a good job on the Docker file. I won't attempt to debug it if it doesn't work. I'm not an Next.js expert by any stretch. Hasn't blown up, so it's, mind you, it could still be copying the node modules files over, so you know. In fact, that's probably what it's doing. I need a Docker ignore file there.
Is the Aspire CLI, if you can tell us, is it written in .NET?
It is.
Or Golang?
.NET. It's written in .NET. It uses Spectre Console, which is like an open source library. And it uses the new system.command-line packages, which should be shipping real soon now.
And you get those fancy loading bars.
From Spectre Console. It's actually really awesome. We made the .NET CLI guys really jealous that we were allowed to use it. I won't. Oh, there we go.
And when it's modifying the AppHost, is it using Roslyn?
How does it modify the AppHost? So this is just C# code. There's nothing exotic going on there. It's just all those methods in the AppHost. That's just plain old C# code. And so what it's doing is in memory there's this distributed application model, and it's inserting resources into it. I'll debug one in a second and show you. Let's go Docker Compose up, and let's see whether our hastily put together demo actually works. Where is Docker? Docker, open in browser. Yeah. Front end, there we go. I don't know if this will work or not. I'm not sure if I got the ports right. It's working. Okay, so that's how easy it can be. All right, and so I could actually deploy that all the way to production and it'll be live. Okay. Yeah, so to answer your question, when you go through the AppHost and it's executing those commands, what it's doing is it's adding resources to this app model. A resource is just like a bucket of annotations. And then what happens is when you run, it interprets all of those annotations to figure out how to start the app or deploy the app.
So those Aspire CLI commands, those don't have any C# code.
No, not at the moment. We do, like when you go Aspire add and you add something, it does update the CS proj file.
Yeah.
It's actually just shelling out to .NET add package or package add or whatever it is under the covers. So there's nothing magical there. We have I'm kind of interested. If we could use, like, if you happen to be running in a place where you had like a Copilot or something available, would you be interested in having? I'm doing ad hoc customer research here. Would you be interested in having Copilot dynamically interrogate your code base and figure out how to add libraries and stuff to it? Just like, no? I'm scared of that too, like, mostly because I'd have to write it. But yeah,
It is tempting. It is very tempting, but I think right now it's so hard.
I think if we were going to look at that, it would be something where we analyse it and we'll say, this is what we think we should do, or would you be okay if we did that? So it's more about try and figure it out and ask consent before you do something. Yeah, because you don't know if it's going to hallucinate or something. So.
I think at a very high level, my question is, what sort of work streams or strategies do you have internally about supporting test-based development and all these sort of things?
Really?
But the bigger question is, I try to use Aspire, I tend to use Web Application Factory. I very rarely run my app, so that thing popping up in the console, not very interesting. And I tired myself in knots trying to get that to that its configuration is substitutable by user secrets or things like that. So yeah, that's a little bit of context, but the big picture
Yep.
is, are you internally
It's a good.
got a strategy around that we can get into? But
Not only do we have a strategy, we've got a feature that's already built.
okay, I mean, this is like last year, so it's moving fast.
So look, testing is hard, right? Particularly if you want to like combine Web Application Factory, which kind of runs in process with your test case. For Aspire, we focused on more integration test scenarios where you actually do spin up your dependencies and you do like a full integration test. We're not quite sure how we're going to mash this together with Web Application Factory and do service mocking. It's something that we're looking at the moment.
I think that's what I ran into. I tied myself in knots.
Yeah. It's an area of investigation at the moment, but you'll notice here when you create your project, you can choose
Yeah, I saw that
a
on
test
the
framework.
timeline.
And what this does is it will just basically add a test project to your solution. And it will launch the AppHost. I'll just wait for it to generate the code. I want to show you the code that it has inside the test case. Okay. So if I go to my projects here, see I've got this test project now, and I've got web tests. We've actually got a test distributed application builder. Okay, and so we give it the AppHost project, and we add some logging and stuff so that you can collect a lot of the telemetry that you need to help debug things when things go wrong. But what it's doing is it will actually start your AppHost, and then you can actually tell it to give you a client that points to a particular resource, and you just make a HTTP call to your actual running code, and it's got all its dependencies running. Now, the upshot is that obviously each test case has to spin up those resources, and so we do things like dynamically allocating ports to make sure that tests don't collide with one another and so on. But it's a fairly intensive test case, so it's very much your integration tests, not your unit tests.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
for your .NET apps, you would continue to use Web Application Factory and mock out your external dependencies in those cases.
I guess the problem I found was trying to use Web Application Factory. It didn't cooperate well with the configuration manager for it to be able to inject in connection strings and
Yeah.
overwrite configuration settings and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, you need to kind of like have conditional code in your entry point to handle it. Yeah, it's actually, we're aware of the issue.
Okay,
We just don't know how to solve it yet.
thank you. That's the answer. Okay, so
Yeah.
it was not ready yet, but
Yeah.
we're working on it. Thank you.
We've certainly heard feedback that people want to be able to like mock out external dependencies and it just be transparent. But there's so many different services out there that talk to so many different protocols that how do you actually do that is a question.
My situation is as simple as I've got a database, it's a legacy database, so I can't, so I just need a connection string.
Yep.
And I can get a connection string to point at.
You can, so for like connection strings, they're literally just configuration values.
Yeah, but they're not going to be in the configuration file. They're going to be either in an environment variable or in user secrets or somewhere like that.
You can stuff them into the configuration directly. I'll
Yeah.
yeah.
Find out where that information is.
Yeah, I'll have to check with Web Application. I'm not an expert on Web Application Factory, but
Yeah, the problem was it was initializing the connection string before configuration manager. It didn't provide you the entry point late enough.
yeah,
So it was trying to load the named connection string out of the connection, out of the configuration file before configuration manager was initialized, and it didn't give you that later opportunity to load the connection string out of the configuration manager
okay.
stack.
I'm gonna have to go and have a look at it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's very, very specific, but
Yeah.
because you didn't support app services or function apps either, I just nothing was working.
we do support function apps now,
Okay.
a specific version, like the container apps hosted version of function apps.
Okay, yeah,
We also have a preview package for app service as well.
yeah, yeah.
I was using it the other day with the team, and I was surprised it worked really well. It was literally merged in the last week.
That's what you wrote in November last
good.
That's right. Okay. How are we going for time?
Yeah, we might wrap up the presentation, and then we'll have some time for the workshop. So, and Mitch will obviously be around if you've got more questions. Would you thank Mitch?
Yeah.